Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Right Think. And I have a fantastic guest on my show today who I've wanted to have on for quite a while, who is a free speech hero and a pro-life hero, in my view, and I'm sure in your view as well. So I'd like to welcome to the show Isabel Vaughan-Spruce. Welcome to the show, Isabel.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, David. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And I think a lot of people became aware of you when you got right into the mainstream media because you were arrested for silent prayer in your head outside an abortion center in Birmingham. And I think a lot of people were absolutely shocked by that someone could be arrested for praying on the streets of England. Which shouldn't happen. But when was that? Because it was a while ago now, and you've been in the news a number of times. When was that, and what led up to that, and how was that? What happened in the whole process with the police arresting you and everything that came after that as well?
Yeah, it's funny really, because I was just doing what I've been doing for around 20 years. In that case, silently saying my prayers on a public street, and that was back in December 2022. And yet things are still going on today, and the situation still hasn't fully been resolved. So right back in December 2022, as you've rightly pointed out, David, I was simply standing silently praying, actually outside a closed abortion center. I was questioned about, what was I doing? What was I, was I praying? And obviously I said I might be praying in my head, but nothing out loud. And that was enough to get me arrested. I was charged with engaging in an act which was intimidating service users, even though there were no service users because the abortion center was closed. And I went to court at that time alongside a priest, Father Sean Goff, who had been similarly charged. He had a bumper sticker on his car that said "Unborn Lives Matter," and that had been parked in a buffer zone, one of these censorship zones. So we both went to court. We were both acquitted within minutes. The prosecution literally didn't want to say anything at all. So that was over very quickly. And then a couple of weeks later, I was rearrested again, standing in exactly the same spot, doing, well, if you can say doing exactly the same thing, as in doing nothing, just simply standing on a public street. This time I was told my prayers were an offence. And I think it's important to note that, because since then people have said, oh, it's not to do with prayers, it's like, you've been banned from that area, you shouldn't have been there. No, I was actually told by the police my prayers were an offence. And when I reminded the police that these prayers were just in my head, they said it didn't matter, that was an offence. And that got me rearrested.
Wow.
For about 6 months, I was, waiting under bail, trying to wait to find out what was going to happen. And eventually I was told the charges were dropped. Then I was given numerous tickets by the police, who came out after that telling me I was going to be fined. In the end, I had to make a claim against the police for wrongful arrest, for false imprisonment, for assault, because I'd actually been searched without my permission. And I received an out-of-court settlement for £13,000. And at that point, I thought, oh, thank goodness, we've realised what went wrong. It's taken a long time, but things are going to be better now. But sadly, since then, the police have come out week after week. At one point, there was police employed simply to stand opposite me on the street, watching me silently pray, 2 police officers. And they keep asking the same questions. Do you know it's a buffer zone? I say I do. Are you protesting? I say, no, I'm not. I'm just silently saying some prayers. Will you move? I say, no, I've got no need to move because I'm not breaking any zones. And then they say, right, goodbye. And then they come back again the next week and the next week. So you can see it's like the process is the punishment. And this process has gone on, like I've said, for 2.5 years now. Before, they still haven't come to a conclusion. They just keep, like I say, intimidating, harassing, which is ironic because in the past, that's what I've been accused of, simply for standing silently. Yet the police are allowed to come and intimidate and harass me week on week on week.
Yeah, the laws that they write say that this is to protect people from harassment, but you're the one being harassed. And, this has even got the attention of the US Vice President, hasn't it, J.D. Vance, who's actually spoken about this very issue. I don't know whether it was your case or the case of Adam Smith Connor, who's someone else who's got into the same situation that you've been very much speaking for and advocating for and defending. You know, when the US vice president can criticize what's happening in the UK in terms of attacks on freedom of speech, or just the freedom to pray in your head on the street, something has gone very, very wrong in this country. And you know what was interesting also about what you said there is that you've been doing this for 20 years. This is not something you just decided to do out of the blue one day because there was a new law. It was something that you've done with no problems whatsoever, and all of a sudden the government decides, or the council decides, oh, we don't want these people here praying or helping women outside abortion centers. We're going to try to use the police to harass them. And this is absolutely appalling. What do you know anything about the legislation that is brought in to do this? Because I understand that there was, first it was done by the councils, and then there's now national legislation to do this as well. Do you know anything about the legal framework that they're using to do this?
I do, and I think it's maybe good to give a little bit of background to that itself, David, because you know, I was praying outside an abortion centre in Birmingham, like I say, for about 20 years. But in 2019, that abortion centre, we were praying outside and offering help to many, many women. And I should say there's been, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of women and couples who've gladly accepted our help, who've continued with a pregnancy that was much wanted. They just didn't know how to continue. And we've helped them for as long as they've needed it. And there's lots of other groups like the one that I'm part of that do that. So we've been very approachable, worked with many women and couples and helped them in many ways. But in 2019, that abortion centre closed down, and we moved to the abortion centre where I've been since, which is the one that I've been arrested twice outside of. And when we went to this abortion centre, you know, as always, very mindful of the area and the residents in the area. We would only have 2, maybe 3 people at a time near the abortion centres. There wasn't a big crowd there blocking the street or anything like that. We had no posters at all. Not that I'm saying it's wrong to have a poster, but we didn't have any posters whatsoever. Just had some leaflets that offered help and gave a bit of information on them. Everything on there was sourced, you know, backed up with NHS statistics or whatever was, you know, appropriate to any information that was on there. And we would just offer them to women going in, you know, with you know, can we help you at all, or would you like a leaflet? Obviously, if a woman said no, or a woman just walked on past, that was the end of it. She wasn't sort of chased down the street like you hear on some news outlets, you know, someone screaming at her or throwing holy water or whatever else crazy stories you might hear. And some of those women, I will admit, were quite fearful when they came. And the reason they were fearful is because they had read the stories about us. So they thought we were going to be there shouting and screaming. They thought we were going to be there judging them. And that was why they were fearful. And I do think that's important to point out, because those who make up these stories don't really care about women, because if they did, they wouldn't be putting that fear into their heads. But some of the residents in that area opposed us, maybe on an ideological basis. You know, we know a lot of people you know, support abortion, and they were very, very antagonistic and aggressive towards us. You know, we were spat at, sworn at, we'd have our property stolen, cars would drive down the road at high speed towards us and veer off at the last second. Some of the young women were threatened to be followed home, said things would happen to their families. There was even physical assaults that happened. Some of these were caught on camera. When I went to the police and said, you know, will you investigate, or why won't you investigate? They said, well, if you don't want to be assaulted, you don't have to come out of your house, do you? So
no way, that's outrageous.
Yeah,
you're the ones who are being harassed, and the police didn't do anything to help.
Absolutely. And at one point, you know, nearer the beginning, we were liaising with you know, I always had a point of contact within the police, and I was liaising with a police officer, and they said maybe it'd be useful for everyone to meet up and have a discussion. And I said, that's a great idea. We'd be happy to do that. So they contacted the abortion centre. They contacted some local residents, some local councillors who'd also been opposed, and obviously us. And I said, yeah, you know, we'll be there. We came along on that date. We were the only ones that came. So nobody else came, nobody from the, no, not representation from the abortion centre, the council, no local residents who'd been invited. So we can see on that, there was willing on our part to talk, to discuss, to mediate, to look at any concerns, but nobody even wanted to dialogue. They just, as far as I'm aware, kept pressing the police to try and get rid of us. And it was in that spirit that the PSPO was brought in. And like you've said, the PSPO is a local order. And originally, PSPO is Public Space Protection Order.
Yeah.
I think quite a few people have heard of them now. PSPOs were originally brought in to deal with things like, dog fouling in parks and things like that, sort of small scale local problems, maybe drunk behaviour in a city centre. That could be dealt with the local police force and the local council without having to go to the government itself to try and sort it out. And local councils would, for instance, maybe ban alcohol in a certain area or ban dogs in a park and things. And just like they ban dogs from parks, they try to ban pro-lifers from public streets. That's how we're being viewed nowadays. But none of the wording in the PSPO actually prevents me from going and silently saying my prayers within that buffer zone. It bans forms of protest, which I've never engaged in outside of an abortion centre anyway. So I felt, in that spirit, I was free to carry on at least silently praying, which is what I've done in the past, because that wasn't banned by the PSPO. But since then, as I'm sure you and many other people will have heard, last year, on Halloween, and I should maybe say that because anyone who's maybe got some Christian faith might know that, we can see the devil's at work here. On Halloween, national buffer zones came in. So that was last year at the end of October. And that means every abortion centre in the whole country has this censorship zone around it, 150 metres around it. So there's vast swathes of land across our country, across the UK, where certain protesting and certain activities are prohibited by law. But that still isn't silent prayer in and of itself. Silent prayer is not a protest. Silent prayer isn't influencing anyone or seeking to influence anyone. It's simply that, a private conversation in one's head with God, or a silent movement of the heart towards God, which can't be banned by any civil authorities or any government.
Yeah, so how would they even know if you are, praying in your head? They can tell if you're holding something and you've got a message or you're going to talk to someone. But if you're just standing there on the street praying in your head, the police officers should just leave you alone because they wouldn't even know what you're doing. That's how it should be, I would imagine. But they still seem to find time to harass you and harass other people who are doing that. What about Adam there in Bournemouth, Adam Smith Connor, because he was arrested and dragged through the courts just like you were, but he seemed to get a fine, a quite hefty fine after the court hearing, which I thought that was absolutely appalling. He should have been completely acquitted. But what happened there with his case? And do you know why he got a fine when you didn't?
Yeah, so I sat through Adam Smith Connor's trial. It was a 3-day trial, and it was really grueling on Adam. I could tell it was a very difficult time for him, unsurprisingly. In a way, it's each one of these is slightly different, and because he was charged not with breaking the national buffer zone, which is something across the whole country. It was the buffer zone, the PSPO in Bournemouth, which will be slightly different to the PSPO in Birmingham, the PSPO in London. There's 5 of these PSPO zones around abortion centres, 1 in Birmingham, 1 in Manchester, 2 in London, and 1 in Bournemouth. So, for instance, there's things in Bournemouth that are banned that aren't banned in Birmingham. For instance, I think in Bournemouth they've banned making the sign of the cross, which obviously a lot of Catholics would do, and things like that, which is, again, you can see Christians being targeted, but that isn't specified in Birmingham. So you can see slight different nuances in the law. But, essentially what Adam was doing still in Bournemouth was silently saying his prayers. And it was absolutely egregious that he should be found guilty. Yeah. And it was the prosecution costs which really bumped up what he had to pay at the end. I mean, they tried to get even more. It was nearly 100,000 they tried to get out of poor Adam.
Wow.
When it was clear in court that he wasn't a man of great wealth or anything, and got a wife and 2 children.
So
That was reduced somewhat, and as you probably know, within a day of crowdfunding, thankfully, it shows the public support that was covered, the cost that he had to pay. But even since then, we've seen Livia Tisici-Bolt. She's had to go through the courts as well, the same court, the same judge, as in the case of Adam. And she was simply standing outside an abortion centre or in the vicinity of an abortion centre with a poster that read, "Here to talk if you want." And she is also now technically a criminal like Adam is. And they are such lovely people. I've got to know them both since this has happened. You know, as I say, I knew Adam already, but I've been in the trial of both Adam and Livia. Such warm-hearted, kind people. You know, Adam, is a veteran. Livia is just such a lovely, upstanding member of her community and has helped so many people in the past. And to think that she's a criminal now because she offered to talk to people if they wanted to. I mean, it's absolutely farcical, this. But unless, people really understand it, I think people have almost sort of said, oh, there must have been something else going on. And I can understand this, people thinking that I'm not hearing the whole story. Maybe something happened before, it was videoed, or something's happened that I haven't heard of. No, this is literally the whole story. And I can, obviously I know that from myself, that there wasn't anything else that happened before cameras switched on. And obviously I only put a camera on to make sure this was recorded. And I had evidence that nothing else was happening, and the same with Adam or Livia. But really, really sinister how things have developed.
It is sinister, and the whole propaganda of the state and the mainstream media is against you, and the way they speak is that you're all really nasty, wicked people, and all you want to do is harass women. And I think the exact opposite is true. You actually want to help women and obviously help children. You don't want any unborn children to be killed in these centers, which is, what would happen. You're against, you're pro-life. Obviously, you're for life. And, the way I would see it, and I think the way a lot of people would see it, is that you're doing a good thing. And there's not been any problem before, but this is just an agenda where a lot of countries are acting in lockstep together to try and bring in these buffer zones, because it's not just happening in England and Wales, it's happening in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, the other parts of the UK, Republic of Ireland, and other places as well. This seems to be something that's being rolled out around the world in various places. I mean, do you know of other places where they're trying to do this as well?
You're right, David. Other countries are looking at doing this as well across Europe. But I do think it's important to say that I don't think this is coming from the ground up. That the general public, I've had such incredible support from. So many messages of support, and not just from people who are also doing this pro-life work. People who've made a point of saying, I'm not pro-life. I don't share your or they might say, anti-choice, whatever they might call it. But they say, I don't share that position, or I don't share your religious beliefs, but I do support your right to be able to stand on a public street and silently pray wherever you want, or in Livia's case, just to be able to have a consensual conversation. And I think, the general public are waking up to the fact that this isn't a healthy society to be in, where we're getting this kind of censorship at this kind of level. And they're right to be concerned, because while it might not affect them personally today, if that can be done in the name of law and in the name of justice, then everyone is at risk. Because if your opinion falls foul of what that the popular opinion is in government, then you can be censored, you can be fined, you can be criminalized, which is, of course, is what's happened to Adam and Livia. So yeah, I think it is encouraging that so many people have woken up to it. A lot of people who are pro-life have realized for a long time that there's been two-tier policing. Like I was mentioning to you, police just not dealing with serious complaints that we've had. And I should say they aren't by necessarily people using the abortion centres, but by the general public, people who are living or passing by in the area, who are very aggressive towards us. Police wouldn't deal with the complaints against them, but they will only look at maybe abortion providers or those who support that ideology. And that's two-tier policing.
Yeah.
And I should make a point of saying that's not every police officer. You know, a while ago I had a police officer stop, obviously knew who I was, and said, I just want to say we're not all the same. And I actually felt quite sorry for that police officer. I thought, how difficult must it be to be a decent police officer in today's police force? And thank God that there are a few decent police officers still around. But sadly, because of those higher up, those police officers are maybe finding it harder and harder to fairly do their job as they really want to.
It seems there's a whole group of activists, or, you know, a mob of activists that are acting against you. That's very interesting. Like you say, it's more people who live in the areas, who maybe are politicians or so on, councillors, who are coming against you and making the complaints, rather than people who are going into the abortion centres themselves. And then activists within the police force who might want to enforce these things, where there are some other decent police officers who don't want to, and who actually probably inside support you, but find it very, very difficult to do their jobs. But also, you know, this is great that you were saying that even people who aren't pro-life support you, because this is a free speech issue. And I think that's something that widely in society people are very, very concerned about. Even if you disagree with somebody, a lot of people would support your right to freedom of speech, to speak out on these issues. And where there's never been an issue before, and stopping you from protesting, now these laws and restrictions are coming in to do that, which is absolutely abhorrent. But just before I finish, I'd like, you know, to turn a bit more to the other issue, because I'm having you on here not just to talk about free speech, but you're obviously a pro-life campaigner, and not everybody is pro-life. But for those who aren't, you know, why would you say it's important to be pro-life? Why do you do this? What's the reasons behind that?
Yeah, and there's so many, David. People have come at this from very different angles, and all of them, if you're logical, if you're reasonable, if you believe in truth, all lead to the same end, which is how abhorrent abortion is. You know, the damage abortion does to women alone, that enough should make us pro-life. If you look at studies in this country have shown that approximately 1 in 17 women taking the abortion pill end up in hospital. And actually recently we've seen studies from America involving over 800,000 women. And those studies have indicated that as many as 1 in 10 women end up with a serious complication after abortion, a serious after effect from the abortion pills. And that's nearly 90% of our abortions are through abortion pills now. So it's you know, it's branded as healthcare, that this is healthcare for women. And yet that many of them are ending up in hospital. And that's just the physical side effects. The mental health side effects are another thing altogether. You know, how do you ever measure what someone's mental health is like? How do we ever know? You know, some of these mental health situations might not come about the next week, the next month, the next year. Sometimes it's 10 years, 20 years. And I've spoken to those women. I speak to women in their 80s and 90s who have said how these things have haunted them all their lives, the abortion that they've been through. So we can certainly see from women's health. I think we're just beginning to realize more how it can affect men too. And I've certainly spoken to men, sometimes men who were very much involved in the abortion, who maybe pressured or coerced a woman, or sometimes just as bad, stood back and said, it's your decision, you do whatever you want, and just kind of like, you know, wouldn't take any responsibility. Or sometimes I have met men who've actually really wanted to continue the pregnancy, but just felt that they were silenced. You know, from a legal perspective, they had no say in it. But all of those men can feel the hurt afterwards, certainly from a psychological perspective and from a spiritual perspective. If we're looking at it from a scientific perspective, you know, we know that science shows us that from conception, a genetically complete, unique, individual human being is created, which is different from both mother and father. And that's not politics, that's not religion, that's simple biology, and is quite uncontested. We can very, very clearly see that and test that now to see that right at conception that happens. So we know that with every abortion, if the ending is achieved, then a new human life is intentionally destroyed. And that can be never be a good thing for a society, to be grouping a whole section of the population as being expendable, which is what happens with abortion. We've seen that happen in previous times with different groups of people, whether it might be Jews, whether it might be people with a different colour skin, or different ethnic background, whatever it might be. We're seeing it today with preborn children. And in the case of those who have got some kind of disability, or maybe have got Down syndrome, then right up until birth, these children can be aborted. And we see that how discriminatory that is. That, you know, if you're considered healthy, you're protected after 24 weeks. But no, if you've got a cleft palate, if you've got, you know, what used to be called a club foot, like I say, if you've got Down syndrome, if you've got a heart defect, then right up until birth you can be aborted. What kind of a message does that send to those who are born with those kind of conditions, that somehow you're inferior, that you're not as worthy of life? And that is the message that is being sent in this, you know, age where discrimination is supposed to be a thing of the past, and where we're also inclusive. We're not inclusive of the preborn child. And then, of course, from a spiritual perspective, you know, every Christian should know that human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. This is what raises us above any other creatures. Yes, we should care about creatures. We should care about the planet. This is something that God has gifted us. We are to look after it and be good stewards. We are to care about animals. They have a certain amount of feelings. Of course, we should care about all those. But human beings have this unique place in being made in the image and likeness of God. Jesus Christ himself became a human. That has lifted humanity to something divine, if we only embrace it. And yet, what are we doing? We're throwing human beings out with the rubbish, discarding them. I know a few years ago it was found that, you know, human remains were being used to heat hospitals of aborted babies. Who knows what goes on behind closed doors? Just recently, I was talking to a doctor, and he was saying how, you know, sometimes cell lines from aborted babies would be used, you know, for vaccinations and for other things, for a certain amount of research. So how we're treating humans from a spiritual perspective is incredibly offensive to God, to our Savior.
And when it was brought in, sorry to interrupt, people were told, well, this is only going to be a few cases, a few hundred a year for extreme circumstances. But it's well beyond that now, isn't it? Do you know, what are the figures now for the number of people aborted every year in the UK? Do you know?
Well, we're given the figures of about 250,000 over England and Wales, and that's an horrific figure. But in a way, what I find just as horrific is the fact that we don't really know, because pills are just sent out in the post. You know, abortion pills are sent out, hundreds and hundreds of them are sent out in the post to women. We don't know whether these women take them, if they pass them on to someone else, who takes them, at what stage of pregnancy they're at. We don't really know what complications those women might have, because it doesn't have to go on their medical records. It's already so unregulated, and yet there's a push for decriminalization, how they've branded it. And we all know what that means. It means abortion up until birth for any and every reason, which means even less safeguards on women, and certainly less safeguards on the preborn child. And that is something that's very likely to be debated this year. And I just hope to goodness that people see through that euphemism of decriminalization and really see it for what it is: abortion up till birth, for any reason at all.
That's horrendous. And yeah, you're right. I've looked at this. This is a Labour MP. I think her name is Tonya Antoniazzi, isn't it? She's trying to lay an amendment to the crime and policing bill that's going through Parliament at the moment to decriminalize abortion. So that's something I think for everybody to try and oppose and to write to their MPs about, to make sure that that doesn't happen and this doesn't get attached to another bill and that gets pushed through Parliament. So I hope that happens. But just before we go, you are the co-director of March for Life as well, isn't it? I think, which happens every year. I go on that when I can. I've been on it a couple of times. It's a fantastic day. When is it this year, and what does that achieve when you do it?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so this year it's on the 6th of September, which is a Saturday. We always have it on the first Saturday of September. And this year our theme is human rights for all humans, which ties in nicely with a lot of the issues we've just been talking about: the human right of the preborn child, the right of the woman to know the truth about abortion, which obviously, you know, it's often held from her until she's already had the abortion. Men's rights, which are trampled on with regards to abortion, the rights of healthcare providers, who often, you know, are pushed into you know, working in some way with abortion. So there's so many rights that, you know, and obviously the rights of pro-lifers now, as we see with buffer zones. So that is our theme for this year. Because of that, in the morning, we're having a pro-life human rights summit, and that's going to be at the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster. And I really encourage people to come along to that. There's so much there, but you can check out on our website and find out about all that's happening there. All the pro-life organisations will have their stalls showcasing their work at the Emmanuel Centre as well as activities for children of all ages. So it's an all-day event, and then in the afternoon we have that march that you described, and that I know I've seen you there many times on that, David. Last year we had probably around 10,000 on that march. It was a really joy-filled celebration of life, the marches. And I do think it's important to have that spirit. That in itself speaks into the issue of abortion. Once you recognise how life is a joy to be celebrated, we recognise, you know, that the opposite of that the hate and the damage that is inflicted through abortion. And then at the end we have some keynote speakers. One of our keynote speakers this year is a man called Josiah Presley, who himself survived an abortion, but has been physically affected from the abortion attempt. So it's going to be fascinating to hear from him and his incredibly moving testimony at March for Life. And there's going to be so much more. So, you know, we're really asking for people to help spread the word. You know, first and foremost, we want you there. There's not a substitute for whoever's listening, you know, or whoever's watching. You can't just send someone else in your place or just tell others about it. We need you. And then once you've, you know, made your own plans, please spread the word around the area. We can send you leaflets, posters, even a short talk to deliver maybe at your church if you can. So if anyone wants to get in touch with us through our website, please do that, marchforlife.co.uk, drop us an email, and we can help you to spread the word and actually do something in your area. Because, you know, I always say that if it becomes illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, will there be evidence to convict you? And there should be. That answer should be affirmative from anybody who considers themselves pro-life. It's not a case of just, if someone asks me, I'll tell them. We need to be witnessing to life in different ways, and this is a perfect opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Isabel. I'll be there on the 6th of September, most definitely. I'm sure lots of people watching will go along as well. I got a lot of media attention last year, even in the USA, because they saw 10,000 people who are pro-life. A lot of them Christians are actually marching on the streets of London. So you're getting international attention there as well as national attention, which is really good. And it's a witness that shows that this is an issue which is very important to a lot of people in this country. We want the freedom to be able to help women in abortion centers, and we want to end the attack on unborn children through what's happening with abortion in this country as well. Anyway, Isabel, it's been really a great pleasure to have you on the show and to speak to you. All the best for everything you're doing, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure to speak to you.